Hello and welcome to this episode of Zeitgeist Podcast with Niklas and Flo. Hi, I'm Niklas.
I'm Flo. Yeah, today we want to start some kind of new series where we try to introduce every week a company or a startup. And we decided to start with Perplexity. I use it barely. I believe you're using it a little bit more. So maybe you can introduce this company to our audience.
Yes, Perplexity has been around for a while now, actually, and they're calling themselves an answering machine. So what it also includes is basically like a classical search engine to get results from the internet. But they were also, I would say, the first to derive real answers from these results. So you could basically ask it any question and it would then query a search index like Google would, but instead of giving you pages of results where you then basically click on links and follow them, you get a directly fully written answer.
So what's the difference between ChatGPT and Perplexity then?
Yeah, so there are a few. First of all, if you look at ChatGPT, for example, they use really large models that compress a very large amount of knowledge. Usually this knowledge is only up to the training point, so it will usually be a few months older. And Perplexity goes a bit of another way. They say they have basically a search database that can be queried like in classical search, and they usually use smaller models to basically synthesize those findings into a common text. And they also give sources for everything, which you will never find in ChatGPT, for example. So you can basically still go to the websites and cross-check the content that's there.
So is that your preferred way to look something up in the internet, or?
Yeah, so for quite a while, I didn't use Google at all. It was just if I wanted to go to a website like Booking, I would just enter Booking and click on the first search result. That would be the only reason I'm still or was still using Google. I think lately, like a few weeks ago, Google has now started to show an LLM answer on top of the search results as well. And now I'm thinking about going back, but for a while I really didn't use Google basically at all for search. In a sense, if I wanted to have an answer for a question, but I just used Perplexity for it.
Okay. Do you know how Perplexity is earning any kind of money?
So they decided, as far as I understand it, to go for a subscription model. Currently, I think they are highly financed by venture capital, so they can afford to burn a lot of money, which they are probably doing. But from the base calculations, it must be feasible for them to earn money with a subscription system. And then it would basically be the same business model as Netflix or something else, that you have a subscription for it for premium, and then you get better models, more queries, and these kind of things.
I have to ask again because I believe that ChatGPT is in everyone's mind when we're talking about AI. What's the difference between the paid model from ChatGPT and Perplexity then?
Yeah, usually I think ChatGPT and also others are now starting to at least include search a bit. But the real big difference is that, like Google, Perplexity would have a full search index of pages. And basically, they would first do some kind of search on the most relevant pages. You can imagine that, like the top 10 results of Google. And then they would use an LLM to synthesize basically or put this into a text with sources. And this is surprisingly good, I would say.
Do you know, like percentage-wise, how many people are using AI today and how the landscape looks like with people using ChatGPT versus Perplexity and maybe even some third-party companies?
That's a very good question. So I think ChatGPT, as far as I know, is by far the most used AI tool out there. I haven't looked at the numbers, but we can basically look it up in parallel. they published some numbers on so in March, basically what they said was they hit 100 million active users in January, and I don't pin me on that, but I think they said they had 500 million now. So especially with the new image functions and so on, ChatGPT has gotten a lot more users. And with Perplexity, we can actually ask Perplexity how, because that might be interesting. So they say, okay, these are probably older numbers, but what it says is something around 15 million active users.
All right. Yeah, that's a huge gap. Do you know anything about the founders behind Perplexity?
Yeah, so at least the CEO, I think he comes from Google, and he was working on the search engine there as well and found it very interesting. And then they basically, when I heard a podcast with him, which is really interesting, then he said they basically started building something like an LLM summary for Twitter search, basically, so that you could search Twitter and get LLM answers. So basically what Grok is doing now. And then they pivoted when the API got paid, as I understood it, to doing full search. And now they are basically taking on Google. So I would say this is probably, even though they are very small, they are probably the closest to the Google target market currently still of all the others out there.
All right. Do you see any potential pitfalls or red flags, any kind of risks using Perplexity or for Perplexity while they are trying to grow?
Yeah, so for oneself as a user, you should obviously at least try to cross-check sources at times. I mean, you should only trust validated numbers. I think it's really good that you have the sources actually, because ChatGPT, for example, is just known to make up things. So it's usually a good idea to check this. Yeah, I think for Perplexity, it's a run for the money for Google. It's like, it's a different business model. It's definitely significantly a less margin business model than the Google business model. I mean, Google search with selling ads is basically the best business model there is, I would think. I think there's nothing that comes even close. So running LLMs on every query is significantly more expensive than what Google has to pay basically for basic search.
Mhm.
This is also or was probably the biggest risk for Google, that they would just be a bit afraid of cannibalizing their core business, which is still their cash cow, even though they have YouTube and so on. And for Perplexity, it's obviously, it's a brutal market, and Google is a huge player. They have absolute top talent. So if they try to compete and want to win, well, it will be very hard, I think, for Perplexity to compete in the long run once Google really pushes into this market. There's a reason why Microsoft never managed to really get any grip on the search engine market.
I see. Yeah, who knows? Maybe Google is buying Perplexity at some point. Do you know anything about the investors behind Perplexity? Any kind of big companies or any kind of individuals who invested in Perplexity?
Yeah, we could also check that. So I think there are quite a number of known investors behind it. So I just asked Perplexity actually. So it seems like Jeff Bezos invested early, Databricks as well, Nvidia usually somehow is in there in a later round. And Databricks was actually investing in the founding team, and there's a number of angel investors, Elliot Gill, I think Ned Friedman. This is probably Y Combinator. And then later on in Series B and so on, there were some larger funds that went into it. It seems also that SoftBank invested. So it's really the big guys in venture capital that have put money in.
All right. I guess we can all agree that AI will definitely be here for a little while longer. So it will be interesting to see who will really make this race and what will happen. I don't have any more questions. If you guys have any questions, just put it into the comments and we can talk about it in our next episode.
Thank you so much for listening. That was this episode of Zeitgeist Podcast. Bye, guys.
All right, bye.